Okay, here it goes. So this is kind of an interesting subject lately because it's more and more on people's radar that we have to make sure that the websites that we build don't have that are green. And so this subject is not really specific for JavaScript. However, there's a whole bunch of JavaScript involved. So we kind of felt like we can connect this to a JS meetup. There are also some other things that make your website more green. So I will also go over those. But the main interest point is probably JavaScript and web development best practices and such. So here it goes. So basically, I am still a developer. So what I did is it's not a general story about that the world is going to burn because we're not green. It is actually a talk about you as a developer that's watching this. If you follow those rules, you can actually make a difference. So it's more like something that you can really do. So it's about how to make more sustainable choices in the production of web technology. So it's still quite generic, right? But hopefully, by the end of this, you will be this.
Unagi.
I hope that had sound and that you could actually see that, because I just morphed these slides to a Google slide. So I'm not so sure if that works. All good. Okay, cool. Thanks, Milos. So basically, this is Ross from the TV show Friends, and he says he has unagi, which is basically exactly Dimitris. Dimitris, you understand it. I'm hoping people are roughly the same age as me, so they have seen this. Basically, for the people who don't know, in this case, unagi means that you're in a state of readiness and you always know what's happening around you. So hopefully, you will have this after this talk about being green on the web. Right, so my name is Tim Benniiks. I live in Paris, but I was born in Amsterdam. And you can follow me on Twitter if you want to. And I also have a YouTube channel where I discuss this kind of stuff. And I also do interviews with speakers and stuff like that. But that's not for this talk. If you feel like you want to check that out, have a go. I work at Valtech, where I'm the director of web development. Valtech is like a technical agency. It's pretty big. We have like 3,000 people, I think. And we do mainly big platform builds for big brands. And so those big brands always have a lot of big websites that are not very green. So that's why this subject is interesting. And I also work at Cloudinary, which is a media asset delivery system, a SaaS. And it also has a DAM and a whole bunch more. And I'm one of the media developer experts there. So let's get going and look at some statistics, because I can imagine you thinking, yeah, the web is just a digital thing on my screen. What does that have anything to do with carbon emissions? So if the internet was a country, it would be the world's sixth biggest polluter. And when I heard that, I was like this.
Oh my
God! It's a real thing. Like imagine those big countries, right? So basically the internet consumes 466 terawatt hours per year. And if you compare that to the UK, for example, it only has 300, right? So this is a really, really big energy consuming system. And these numbers are quite, I didn't really go deep in the research. This is only about what the web is itself and a bit of the server farms, but not potentially like you using your phone and using energy as well. Then it's way bigger. But that would be too hard. So the average website right now, this is from, these statistics are from May, is 1.76 grams of CO2 per page view. And so for a website that has like 10,000 monthly page views, that's like 211 kilograms of CO2 per year. How this is calculated, we'll get to in a sec. I won't go too deep into that because that's a whole talk on its own. You can, if you wanted to later on, you can visit website carbon.com, and they have a whole explanation of how they come to those numbers. So as web developers, we have 3 areas of interest of stuff you can do right now on the project that you work on to actually make your website more green, right? So the first one is UX and design. That sounds a little strange, but we'll get into it and I'll explain why. Then, of course, we have the front-end development best practices. This is where the JavaScript comes in, how we deal with optimization, things like that. And then there's also architecture choices. Architecture choices as in What kind of server do I use? What is my architecture? Am I like JAMstack, or do I use some headless system, or do I use a monolith? Stuff like that. Okay, so first things first. So you can do that now, but I'd advise you to do it after the talk. Is go to websitecarbon.com yourself and actually put in your personal website, or put in the project that you're currently working on, and be amazed of how non-green it is, most likely. They have this really interesting way of calculating it. I won't do it now because I'll have to switch tabs and share them. It's a little bit like potential for failure. So I'll just keep it like this. And if you feel like it, you can do that yourself while you listen to this talk to see what is the impression of your website. Okay, so first things first, let's look at design and content, because why would design and content actually matter for being green?
Look, I drew a sketch of how we're going to do it, okay? Rach, that's you. That's the couch.
Oh, what's that?
Oh, that's me.
Dimitris, you know them all. I love this. The chat is awesome. Basically, these are UX developers trying to figure something out, because in the end, what you see is UX people are always overruled by the committee of the team of developers, right? So this is always kind of funny. So this kind of felt that for me. Honestly, shitty accessibility and UX are big offenders on websites with a high carbon footprint, because basically, if you have really good SEO and you have really good usability, the footprint goes down. Because if a page is easy to find and it's easy to understand, people don't really need their devices as much, right? If you want to find a product on Amazon and you search for it and you find it immediately, that whole chain of events was really easy and therefore really short. So there's much less energy wasted. If the UX or the accessibility is so terrible that you cannot find that product, you have to click 20 times and wait for pages to load, your device will be generating a lot of energy, but also the servers that it's hosted on, they all need to fire up stuff and antennas go, and that is just more carbon output, right? So if your UX is great and your findability is great, your accessibility is great, SEO, all of that stuff, it's better. So it's kind of convey the message that you have to send in as little content as possible. And I know this might be a little bit challenging because, of course, you have people who are creative and they want to do a big storytelling thing and want to keep people on the website. So as a developer, you kind of have to find your way to kind of whip them into place and say, hey, this is your technology budget of performance, right? So it's a bit like this.
Not whipped. Whipped is. That's what I did. Whoop-a!
This what might be one of my favorites, actually. Anyways, so if you want to have a look at that accessibility and that SEO and like those basics, a really rough tool is using the developer tools in Chrome. Just run an audit, right? That's a kind of a base. However, if you want to do better, like a lot of bigger companies that actually have a lot of money to build their website, they have SEO agencies and accessibility agencies that really dive deep and really help you there. Not everybody has this. So if you are a developer right now and you don't have access to that, just use your audit and then just have a look at what it says. Like just dive in and see, because you can likely fix a whole bunch of things there. So as a web developer right now, not an accessibility expert, but what can you do to actually make the accessibility of a page itself better? So here I'm not really talking about the design or the storytelling because you might not have as much influence, but you can at least look at the technology on the page to make sure it's keyword accessible. You have skip links, so all of those kind of like the colors are right, the fonts are big enough, things that you can actually use that website easily. Right, so of course you're gonna have to go to the WGACA or AA compliance. Note that I'm writing code compliance. I'm not writing actual compliance because that's really hard to get and it's a little bit subjective. So just have a look at the code, and if you don't have any errors when coding, then you are compliant in code, and that's all you can do as a developer, right? So let's stay pragmatic here and really make everything relative. this sounds kind of like an open door, right? But as it turns out, a lot of people who need accessibility tools, let's say use Firefox, for example. In Firefox, you can change a whole bunch of things. So you can actually say, okay, zoom this to 300%, but then it doesn't zoom the font if it's in pixels, or it only zooms images. So if you make everything relative, even your media queries, everything zooms really nicely. And then what you get is that people are on a desktop, they zoom to 300%, they use their keyboard, but the interface is mobile because you zoom so much. So if you do all of that kind of stuff, you kind of want to make sure that your code can support that, because this is happening much more than you expect. So let's talk SEO for a little. These are kind of open doors yet again, but I just wanted to go over it because if your page is not findable, a user has to use the internet or his device or whatever way longer to actually get to where they're going. So it's a higher carbon footprint, right? So use a canonical URL. If you don't know what that means, any of this stuff, just put it in the Q&A. We can talk about it later. Otherwise, this talk can be pretty long. Of course, have proper title and description. Use a sitemap. Use schema.org rich data. This is like if you talk about a recipe, if you use the right rich data from schema.org, Google will already see it's a recipe, so it's easier to find. Use OG tags that are correct. If you share it, you want to see the right stuff, right? Make sure you don't have those kind of errors. Use HTTPS. These are all kind of simple things, but I just wanted to give you an overview and put that in. Correct page outline is having the right header 1 to 6 in the right order. But I want to engage my user as long as possible. Every client tells you this, right? But they are not TikTok, probably. Like TikTok is this thing where you keep on going. Just like Facebook, they want to keep you on. But it's likely you're probably not this in your job. So I'll let Joey explain.
Right? Because if he doesn't like you, this is all a moot point.
A move point?
Yeah. It's like a cow's opinion. It just doesn't matter. It's moot.
So basically, the goal should be find the thing as fast as possible, really say what you need to say, and people will leave. It's really likely that people visit your website once anyways. You're lucky if they stay and do more. Honestly, just chill out and do a good job on the storytelling, the UX, SEO, all of that stuff. Let people find the thing they're looking for and go away again. You'll probably be more successful that way. So I understand your boss gave you this goal, right? It's fine. If you then have to do that, like every project I am in, the client is like, keep people engaged, keep them on. It's e-commerce, let them explore. We always say, just find the product, done. Anyways, if you cannot do that and your boss exactly tells you, okay, you're going to have to keep people engaged, at least follow the basic guidelines for all the stuff I just told you, but also performance. And we'll get into that in a sec. And that's where the JavaScript part comes in a little bit more. So the second part we as web developers can look at is really the best practices of making a website. And it's kind of funny, right? While I present this, I feel like I'm giving you guys all these open doors that you kind of know about. But then when you put them all in context later after this talk, you kind of have this really powerful tool set to really make this carbon footprint smaller. So actually the biggest thing, almost the biggest one for the carbon footprint is actually performance of the front end, right? So around 3 years ago, an average page had 4 grams of CO2. And now that we've had all these new things happening, right? We have the JAMstack, we have like Webpack and Babel that optimize really well, and things now get loaded async, stuff like that. Nowadays, it became 1.75 grams. So it's already a whole bunch better, but it can be way better. There's so much to do. So here are the biggest offenders in the front-end performance that actually make your site have a high carbon footprint. And you know what? It's the stuff we cannot control. And that kind of sucks. I'm sorry, but that's true. Actually, the worst things are the third-party libraries, the embeds, the media assets, JavaScript personalization, Google Analytics, like those Google Tag Managers, things like that. The stuff we cannot really control. Like if you embed a video, or you embed something called like Bazaar Voice that gives you ratings and reviews on a product, they load a crap load of stuff on your page. And you know what? That's really bad for performance, but you cannot really do much about that, right? So these things, like I said, they're poorly optimized because their business is to get on as many pages as possible and just work without any thinking. You just put the script tag in, it goes. So they kind of have to do everything to make that happen. They're not really that concerned about super performance stuff. Lately, they are a bit more, but generally they are not, right? And also on top of that, that's another story that we're going to talk about a bit later. They might be hosted on something that's not green, using green energy. You don't actually know where these static assets come from, right? So the best thing you can do is actually to eliminate the bloat, right? Remove as many third parties as possible. And I know that's probably hard to do, but that's actually the truth. If you remove, like what we kind of see is like people use Google Tag Manager, right? And if it's just that one and only Google Analytics is in it, it's fine. But then they always put more stuff and that becomes so heavy. So it's also like this, like, do you really need, like, even if it's on your end, right? Do you need the whole Lodash library, or do you need, well, these are a bit old references, but you know what? I put them in for fun because a lot of websites actually run Modernizer and jQuery 1.x right now. You don't need those, right? You don't need the whole moment.js. And you know, if you watch the talk before, if you use Babel correctly, you don't need all of Lodash. You can just load one part of Lodash. So be smart about that, right? So if you have to use a library, make sure it's modern and it understands like native ES6 modules and stuff like that, because Webpack can do a lot of magic. It can do tree shaking. It can use Babel to compile your code that it's super small. It can lazy load the bundles. You can split things up, use HTTP2. There's a whole lot of talk there. I won't go into that now, but you can actually do a lot to eliminate the bloat. And then if you have to use something that you're sure you have to, make sure it's a modern library. So I think the worst one, like I just alluded to, is Google Tag Manager, but also we have all these front-end personalization engines. So what that is like all these big enterprise brands, they love personalization. So you go to a website and like for example, I work for L'Oreal and we do a lot with skincare. So when you click on a bunch of products about skincare because you have a dry skin or you have an oily skin or stuff like that. Yes, I live in France and I know everything about lipsticks because that's my job as a developer. But like when we do those kind of things, we kind of want to remember what people clicked on and then personalize the experience for them. So products that might be interesting for them might pop up. But it's really hard to do that in the backend because it's really expensive and there's a lot of work involved. So a lot of front-end tools came into play, which basically means they track every click you do. And then based on whatever your behavior is, it will inject DOM and it will change DOM. So it's really touching the DOM directly when you click somewhere. So first of all, that's slow. It's a poor thing to use. The usage is not very nice. But also those files are usually like 1 megabyte because they have all the components in and they have to choose one and just ram it into your DOM. They are so bad. It's basically like this.
Everything you want.
That's Google Tag Manager for you, right? Because Google Tag Manager can also, for example, it starts with only Google tagging, but then they might add Adobe tagging, they might add others, they might actually do CSS fixes through that. It's insane. And so basically the bloat generally is added through the Google Tag Manager. We've seen 2 versions of jQuery being added through Google Tag Manager to do whatever craziness we didn't even know. People have no idea what they're adding to your website, right? And it's this.
All right, I don't want to alarm anybody, but Monica's hair is twice as big as it was when we landed.
Basically, this means you go live, you're very happy, everything is clean. And then a month in, you check the website and they just added a whole bunch of stuff like Monica's hair. Right, so here's a controversial opinion for you. most people or brands only use like 5% of the Google Tag Managers and the personalization stuff and all that kind of thing. Maybe it's just not worth the bloat, right? A lot of brands or website owners or your clients are just not senior or mature enough to understand what to do with all the data they are gathering. On top of that, there's security issues, well, not with Google itself, but grabbing everybody's data, following them around on the web. There's all this privacy stuff. And if you don't use that data, why give it to Google, right? Just maybe it's not worth the bloat, right? So if I tell this to my clients, they're not going to be happy, but they kind of know I'm right. And if you didn't have this, your website would be way faster. Okay, so there's another best practice that we can use. That's not really, it's a little bit JS focused, but also other things. It is progressive enhancement. So what progressive enhancement means is kind of you start simple without any features. You do feature detection, and based on the features that you find, you add code, right? So the simplest could be I have no internet and I am on a desktop device, right? No touch input. Maybe then the next one is I have internet. So, okay, I have a connection, so I can do stuff. Next one is maybe I'm on a tablet, so I have a touch input. Based on touch, I can add some features. And then you can do this from CSS to JavaScript to a whole bunch of stuff, right? Do I have intersection observer? Yes. Okay, let me lazy load the images when I scroll. Like there's all this kind of stuff. So you start very simple, and based on the features that you try to see if it supports it, you add them. And so this is something that's really cool because on the simplest devices, your website will now work really well. But also if there's almost no internet, it will kind of work because JavaScript itself is a feature. What if without JavaScript, you only see the SSR that your next application or your next application rendered on the node side of your server? The website just works. Your SEO is perfect. If you have shitty connection, that can actually happen and it works. The opposite thing is graceful degradation. So this is what we used to do until a couple of years ago, and it still happens a lot. So what this means is I have a blue sky vision of everything that's awesome on my website. I want to build every feature in, check it on Chrome, happy days. And then your client checks it on a Safari one version back, or I dare say it, Edge or maybe Internet Explorer 11. This stuff still exists, right? It's everywhere in the wild. So then what you have to do is add extra code on top to make the code that you build that's so fancy work on simpler devices, which means a lot of extra code on top. You might be starting to use like the Babel polyfill, right? That is a huge, huge file. And of course, you don't have to use that. You can use the Babel environment, but there's all these things that make your code more complex to make this happen, which means progressive enhancement has way less code and therefore has a lower carbon footprint. So you have to change your mindset. You're going mobile first, content first. Without JavaScript, it still needs to work. And then if you add JavaScript, you enrich. Okay, and now, actually, this might be the biggest one. Media is really, really bad for performance. And managing media is actually super, super hard also. Like everywhere on the web, people talk about, okay, how do I make a responsive image? How do I optimize that image in quality or resolution? What do I have to do? Not to mention video. Like also this tool that we're using right now, you see my webcam, you see my screen, that's all optimized and streamed. And that needs to be managed a certain way. You can probably see that my audio is not completely synced because this shit is hard, right? The concept, however, is fairly simple. What you have to do is optimize assets to have the smallest file size, the correct file type, and the correct resolution, but do this in the context they are used in. So basically, if you have a small device, load a small image, and maybe make the quality 80% or something like that. But then when you are a brand like, let's say, Rolex, that wants pristine images, then the context is different and you might load different kind of images or video, stuff like that. So the context that we have here is pretty simple. We kind of understand, right? But for some reason, we are pretty incapable. Like we can do Google Stadia, which literally streams 60 FPS 4K to a browser with input lag that's not crazy. This can happen. We know how to do this. I'm not saying this is the best gaming experience, but we can do it. But then showing a simple image is actually almost impossible. Like, go to any random website, you will find a 4 megabyte PNG somewhere in some blog post. Like, why? It's not hard. This is so bad for the environment. There's so many bytes going over the wire, right? So where I work in enterprise with big systems, we always have KPIs for performance, and those images always break those KPIs down, and we never make it. So you can try to DIY an optimization system. We have done that in the past. You can basically, when you load an image, it goes through some backend that optimizes it. There's a whole bunch of stuff to do, but it's really hard to do. It's time consuming and therefore very expensive, right? So turns out there's a whole bunch of SaaS platforms out there that do this for you. Actually, we just saw in the introduction about the sponsorship of the CityJS Conf. We have IX, or we have Cloudinary, or we have TwigPix. There's a whole bunch of systems out there that deal with images for you, and they have done all the homework. Like Cloudinary did this work for 10 years. They know what to do with images, and you don't have to think. So if you can, optimize media and let others do it. They are also not that expensive. I've used Cloudinary for years. I haven't paid a dime, and after every image I use is optimized. So next, by the way, if there's any questions, because I'm going pretty fast because there's a lot to talk. Oh yeah, so the tiny PNG is actually also really good. So those SaaS platforms tend to also use tiny PNG, but I think tiny PNG themselves have a service as well nowadays. It's really cool. So the next thing, which is closer to more JavaScript related things, but also Webpack, for example, is like lazy load everything you can as much as possible. So only load something if a user needs it. Like, we see so many websites nowadays that when you hover a menu item, a whole big mega menu pops up with a bunch of images and stuff. If you actually don't hover that menu item, you will never see those images. Don't load them. There's no need. If you have, let's say, a third-party search engine like Algolia, that's pretty heavy on the JS, but it's awesome, but it's pretty heavy. So why not only load that when you click on the search icon, you load the bundles with Webpack, for example, and then you use it, right? So only use stuff when the user needs it. So when you scroll down, only then load it in. Don't waste resources you don't need to waste. Let's see if you guys get the reference. Dimitris, I'm waiting. Okay, anyways, these are lazy boy chairs. So that's why I thought that would kind of fit with lazy loading. Lazy load all the things. Like, you can lazy load images, videos. For videos, it's not always the best approach, but you can do it, like, because videos can stream in chunks. And you can encode the video to say only load 1 second and then load the rest when the user clicks on play. So video might be a bit out there, but you can lazy load iframes, third-party libraries. Like, every project I do now. Rosita, nice. Sorry, this is an insider's French joke, I guess. Anyway, so basically in every project I do now, I lazy load, like if I have a YouTube embed, I basically use the iframe embed, and I don't put the source of the iframe there until the user scrolls or has it in view. Or you add loading is equals lazy on your images. Or any third-party library. What I do now, let's say I use React or I use Vue.js, I tend to use Vue.js. I actually built a little component that actually is able to lazy load third-party libraries, and then when it's loaded, it fires an event, puts it in the Vuex store, or it uses just like a simple pub-sub. Once it's loaded, I know it's loaded, and then I fire up whatever initialization you need for that third party. I think you can do this probably for 90% of third parties out there. So just never load it on load, because imagine you are on your cheap phone somewhere in a place in the world where there's not that much internet, right? In a lot of places in China, the 4G or whatever they call 4G there is really, really slow. So people tend to just read news items. If they dare go on a website that loads whatever third party, like a Facebook follow button that they will never click, it takes you 20 seconds to load. Like we did a whole bunch of tests where we had a very simple Vue.js application. We had a simple Angular one and a React one. This is 2 years ago, I think. On an average phone in India, I think it was in the south of India or something, the React app took 20 seconds to be time to interactive and actually work. And there was nothing added to it. So imagine how heavy this stuff is on its own. Adding third parties, images, all that stuff, it will basically just kill the experience of a user. Plus it's heavy for the environment. So lazy load. If you don't need it, don't show it. However, there's GDPR. Sometimes you cannot lazy load stuff, and it needs to be there before you do other things. So there's all these GDPR vendors now that deal with the opt-in. So when you opt in to say yes, then you can load everything. So you kind of cannot always lazy load those things. They have to be there before the browser renders anything. Okay, we're almost there. Server architecture. Oh, wait for this one. It's cool.
Check out this bad boy, 12 megabytes of RAM, 500 megabyte hard drive, built-in spreadsheet capabilities, and a modem that transmits at over 28,000 bps.
Imagine that thing loading a website. That would be fun. So let's talk about server architecture. Again, just looking at the chat. Yeah, so this talks about this opt-out and opt-in stuff. And you're right, in some countries, you need like 3 opt-ins. And in some countries, you're not allowed to, by default, check in the opt-in. It has to be a click a user does. And in the US, you can already pre-select the opt-in, but like there's all these different things, and that's just really challenging. So sad thing about this is we have companies like Optagon, I think it's called. We have Quantcast that deal with all of this. And, those are like third parties, right? And they are also slow, but there you cannot lazy load them. So we're just going live with a project like next week. And without the Quantcast GDPR thing, plus the analytics tracking that's attached to it, we are 99 score in Google in Google audits, or like between 95 and 99. You add it, we're at 60. And we cannot lazy load it. So yeah, that's a sad time because we cannot actually say we don't want to use it. We have to. All right, so going back to the server architecture, right? Probably a lot of people watching this now are lucky enough to work with a lot of modern technology. Maybe you work with Node.js and server-side rendered apps or single-page apps or stuff like that. But a lot of us are still using like the thing we've had for a long, long time. Right, that's the monolithic application, your WordPress, your Sitecore, your whatever, those kind of big systems, right? So you can see there's a user which then connects to a web server, which connects to CMSs and services and databases. It's all one big block. There's a bit of issue with that approach if you talk about a bunch of things, but also about power consumption and stuff. So first of all, it's pretty expensive. And I'm saying that because the servers it runs on are always on. They're always keeping state. It's one big application, right? So if you don't use half of it, it's still on. And you pay for that. It's usage, right? You pay energy costs, but maybe also user costs. It has some performance issues because if you want to scale one part of the application, you have to scale the whole thing. That's pretty intense to do. Like when Christmas comes and you have a WordPress website and you don't want to go static on a CDN, how do you do that? There's a whole bunch of performance impact there. It's slower. If you would do a single page app, for example, your first page load might be a bit slow because it loads all your bundles and everything. But then subsequent page loads are just API calls. So it's really fast. It's much better for the environment. There's some security issues. That's not this talk, but it's much easier if there's one big system that always up and always running and always keeps state. It's much easier to try on different places to hack that. There's just more surface area. Power consumption, as it is always on, and you need to scale this thing. And if you scale it really big with multiple servers, it consumes a lot of power, right? And so it's harder to scale. So if you think about something like the JAMstack, that is a pretty big difference, right? Of course, it doesn't work for all websites, but now that I've worked with JAMstack a whole bunch and I work with all these big enterprise systems and I'm looking at that, actually, I think 90% of all websites can be a JAMstack site. I'm not sure how much you guys know about JAMstack. I'll go over it in like 2 minutes, just quickly. So basically what JAMstack does, this is a pretty intense graph. The simplest way to explain it is you write your code, you do stuff, and when you do build, so Webpack build or whatever you do, then your website, then the dynamic stuff happens, right? So it will actually either look at your code for your content, for your markdown files. That's what I do in this slide. But you can also think, okay, I'm going to just talk to a headless CMS, grab all my stuff. I'm going to talk to my media thing. I'm going to do a whole bunch of stuff, make a package of static files, and then put that on the CDN edge. This means there are no servers involved anymore. It's only on the CDN, and it's static files. So suddenly, if you want to scale it, you have a bunch of static files. The only way to scale that is you just have more of them on the web. And those CDNs, they take care of that for you. So there's no servers up and running anywhere. That's really nice, right? So I think, like I said, most websites can run this way. And especially if you add some extra software as a service providers, because maybe you need logged in view for something, or you might want to have a super fancy faceted search, or you want to have whatever other stuff, you can actually have that JAMstack site as your base and then attach all those services. And it's like decentralized, right? So if you don't use a service, you don't pay for it. And if you had the monolith where everything is inside, it's always on, so you pay for it. So I know a bunch of my colleagues, if they watch this, they're going to roll their eyes because they work with something like Sitecore, which is a big monolithic system. They have some headless stuff also, but it's such a rich environment that it's super awesome. You can use it really well for everything you want. However, there's a company called Uniform that now can make these kind of websites also into JAMstack. So you can keep using your Sitecore, do whatever you want to do, but when you hit publish on a page, the Uniform tool will actually grab the whole website, make it static, and upload it to the CDN. So you can keep your old workflow and still have the benefits of a JAMstack website, which is much better for the environment, right? Oh, yes, Epi Server. I know, I've worked with that a bunch at where I work. Similar approach, right? So another thing is called serverless. To explain what serverless is, we need another talk, but basically, let's just keep it simple. For serverless, how I see it, you don't need a central server to do stuff. You kind of can use like Lambda functions or Azure functions or however you want to call them. Use them as microservices, right? So basically, a Lambda function can be a very simple function that lives in the cloud, that has an input and an output. It doesn't know about anything else. If you don't use it, it's asleep. You don't pay. If you want to scale it because you use it a lot, it's very easy because it's such a simple function. You can just ask Azure or whoever hosts it to just make sure that it can handle the load. And this really works. And then you can connect all of those up and profit from that. So you don't need to have a big server running with stuff. You can actually build a whole bunch of little functions that you sometimes use that you call from your main application, and that will help a lot. And I have a bunch of examples of that, but I'm mindful of the time, so we don't have to go into it too much. But that is something that can really help. And it's so light that it's much better for the environment, right? Okay, almost the last slide. And this means there is actually an elephant in the room that we didn't discuss, right? And that elephant is we have all these server parks everywhere, right? Those server parks have cooling. They consume a shitload of power. Just think about the Facebook server parks, or think about like iCloud server parks where we stream iTunes, like all of this stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on there, right? And of course, if we didn't have those, the world would be better off, but then we wouldn't be able to stream this talk. So we do need them. So if you have the opportunity to talk to your client or your boss, choose a hosting partner or a CDN or whatever is in those server parks that has a low carbon footprint, right? So try to persuade your clients to find a hosting company that actually makes sure that their hosting is somehow green. So of course that's not always possible, but there's a whole bunch of ways to actually make it seem more green, which is, for example, I think Apple does this. So their server parks are clearly not green. There's a whole bunch of energy going through that, right? However, what they do in their own business, like in their offices and in other places, they try to offset it, right? So they try to be carbon emission negative in their offices to be super sustainable. And therefore, maybe their server parks that are in the plus, it's evened out a little bit. So there are no green server parks, most likely, but there are companies that try to balance it out. So there is this nuance to it. So I cannot be saying there is green energy hosting. It probably doesn't exist. Maybe it does, but it's not on the scale that we need for big projects. However, there's a lot of information and you can try to find it out there. If you want, I can point you to some stuff. So let's conclude. Actually, it's not that hard, right? I gave you a whole bunch of best practices that you most likely already knew about. You just have to combine them. So when you follow general UX and SEO guidelines, follow the performance guidelines, reduce the bloat, and deal with media, and you have the right architecture, and you have green hosting. You see, there's a lot of things there. But all of this, let's say you have a personal blog, right? You can do all of this and learn a ton of that. And once you know more, you can actually argue about it. And then you can also talk to your clients or your boss or your team to show them that this is actually possible. Oh, there's something in the chat. Let me just check. It's interesting to note the new content visibility CSS property, which does not render the out of viewport content at all. Yes, I've heard of it. I have not seen it and I have not used it, but I'm really interested. Okay, I'm going to click that link later on. There's actually this new loading equals lazy thing for images that came in. And the threshold for the lazy loading is actually really big. So it's kind of funny, right? So you come up with this lazy loading thing as a standard entity. And then they started with the offset of 3000, which means if your image is down here and your, oh, sorry, that was my mic, and your user is here, right? Oh, and now I'm out of focus. Oh, I'm back. If that's 3000 pixels below, so they haven't really scrolled there yet, it will already load the image. To me, it's like, okay, but why is this is not lazy loading? So recently they changed it. It's now 1250 pixels, I think. It's still not that great. So when I combine or when I have a look at my own lazy loading code compared to the loading equals lazy from the browsers, mine is still much better for the environment. Because when you scroll down, you just see the images fade in. Anyways, so I'm always a little bit skeptical of those new tools because they have to be ironed out. But Dimitris, thanks. I'm going to have a look at the content visibility thing. That's it, guys. So I spoke a whole lot. Thank you for staying. If you're interested, you can always follow me on YouTube or on Twitter.
Thank you, Tim. That was really amazing.
Oh, you're very welcome.
There's a lot of things that, we normally think, oh, yeah, I will do this, but then you don't.
Yep.
And then the website is like, oh, why the website is slow? Well, you didn't do it.
Exactly.
Or I think Adobe AM stuff, I've seen them, they slow down everything.
Oh man, there's this thing from Adobe that does some analytics tracking, I think. It's just ridiculous. I'm sorry to say, but why would you do that to a developer? Like I have KPIs for big clients, right? We're not making them, but the clients, they're destroying me for not making them, but they also force me to use these tools.
There was a company I worked before where they developed a website using Angular, and then whenever they want to make changes, they were using Adobe targeting.
Oh, yep.
So they were loading JavaScript once, and then we were writing more JavaScript to change the page. So,
And this is what I say about the reducing bloat. That part that's that exactly. And I see it so often. I always start to cry. You put a website live, it's really fast. A month in, they added some stuff, and you're like, but why? You just wanted a black banner somewhere. Just ask me. Like, we bill you one day and we fix it. It's much nicer.
yeah. Any questions, guys, before we close up?
Well, I see one that's how many trees we need to plant to balance CO2 emission. And actually, if you go to website Carbon, we can probably do that. How about we do that? Do you still see my? So I just built a new website. Should we check it?
It's an amazing website. This one I've used it before as well.
It's super good. So I just removed this website, and what I did is I changed it for Nuxt.js. It's still highly optimized. Google audit reaches like 99 on the homepage, but this is different. Yeah, it's much worse than I had before. So this page is cleaner than 78% of the web pages tested. My previous website had less content on the homepage. It was like 92%, so it was nicer. However, now we can read about the question, right? So only 0.33 grams of CO2 is produced on my page, which is nice because the average is 1.76, so I'm way below.
There's one more question. Does it help energy efficiency web-wise as users to be using uBlock and similar software?
Wait, was it in the chat? Because I didn't really understand.
In the chat, yeah.
Does it help energy efficiency wise us as users to able? Oh yes, man, definitely, because I do that all the time. I don't use uBlock, but I use like AdBlock Plus, I think, and basically it blocks some assets from loading, so Google Analytics doesn't happen on my machine, which means I don't load it, so the website is better for energy. So yes, please use it.
We will have to close now.
For the question, go to the website Carbon because it's actually explaining that it's 2 trees in my case.
Oh, yeah.
So my page emits the amount of carbon that is 2 trees in a year, but a lot of websites is much more. Anyways, sorry that I interrupted you, but I wanted to.
No, it's okay. That was a question, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We will close now. We will have a JAMstack talk in our conference. By the way, that's
cool.
how I found you basically, because you were in a Twitter chat. Me, you, Debbie, and Maya.
Yes.
And, Maya and Debbie, they will be doing a JAMstack session in our conference.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So Debbie's gonna be giving a talk about the new Next.js.
Yeah, this is what I'm using for my new website. Basically,
It's amazing. I'm gonna be doing a talk about it also on the International JavaScript Conference. How you can do authorization and authentication in Next.js.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah, if anyone wants to continue watching meetups, then I'm gonna post a URL here. There's a meetup going on at the moment, and Dylan Seaman, he's gonna come in and talk. So if you want to carry on and having like a meetup extravaganza going on,
yeah, I love that.
You can carry on, and unfortunately I'm in Greece, so it's now 10 o'clock. So I'm probably gonna stay for a bit, and then I'm gonna go to bed, or watch like a movie and relax a bit. But it was very nice to have you, and also Siddharth. And we will have the Webpack talk on the lunchtime session.
Sure. All good. Let me know when. I'm happy to do it.
Maybe not tomorrow, but maybe soon.
No, tomorrow is too soon, man.
Yeah. No, I'm just joking. All right. Have a good day and a good night. to everyone. Thank you very much for this meetup. It was amazing. I'm gonna go back to the main screen, and then we're gonna close it off. If somebody wants to stay, they can stay. Thank you all.
Cheers. Merci.
Bye. Thank you.